6 years with Mike, but he kept a younger girl on the side. From rags to riches, I didn't get a grand proposal, just indifference and humiliation. When I suggested breaking up, he smirked. Okay, but you've caused trouble with me and my family, and you've been with me all these years. Besides me, who else would want you? Later at a party, when news of my engagement came out, Mike lost his composure and demanded to know who it was. The moment I spoke up, everyone turned to look at the man sitting in a position of power and elegance. He paused with the cigarette in his hand. Then he looked at me with deep eyes and said, "Since it's out in the open, sit next to me." When I arrived at the company, Mike was in a meeting. What bad luck, I wish I hadn't worn these shoes. I look better than her, don't you think? Turning my head, I saw the girl across from me wearing the same CL red-soled high heels. Her colleagues were pale with fear, whispering to her, "Selena, that's Lisa. She's also a senior executive at the company, Mike's future wife." As I gazed at her, Selena walked up to me boldly, pointing at the part of the bracelet visible on my wrist and said, "Lisa, you also wear a Bulgari Serpenti bracelet?" "Mine was a gift from Mike, is yours too?" Employees stared in shock, and I saw the expensive bracelet on her fair wrist. Mike had never given me such a valuable gift. He gave me the most expensive, a luxurious bag. Back when he had nothing, I scolded him for spending recklessly. Now that he's successful, he forgets my birthday often due to being overwhelmed with work. I realized he wasn't too busy to remember, he just didn't want to make an effort for me. Seeing me silent, Selena's smile turned smug, matching a person to the appropriate gift. "Maybe you're not deserving of it in Mike's eyes." There was an exaggerated gasp from behind Selena. The nosy employees, looking pitifully at me, came closer to listen. Had they forgotten that before becoming Mike's girlfriend, I was a wealthy heiress? I smirked and rolled up my sleeve to reveal the full bracelet. It sparkled with diamonds. "Little sister, he's quite stingy with you. Mine is all diamonds, can buy 10 of yours. Besides, I'm not like you. I don't need to rely on flirting to receive gifts. I can buy whatever I want myself." Selena stood frozen, her face turning extremely unpleasant. "What are you all crowding around for?" Mike's voice interrupted. The onlookers dispersed. Selena, looking distressed, threw herself into his arms, her eyes teary. Mike stiffened slightly and glanced at my reaction. Until she murmured, "Mike, Lisa said I sell myself." Mike, normally gentle, looked displeased now. "Lisa, why are you so harsh with your words?" They stood together, a natural contrast to me. I crossed my arms, looking at her badge, and directly asked him, "Seasoned professional manager, recently hired?" Senior roles require over 5 years of experience. What's her background? How did she get this position? Did she follow the proper procedures? Rubbing his brows wearily, he said, "You interrupted an important meeting for this trivial matter?" I sneered, "Don't evade the issue. We run a legitimate company, not a small workshop. Our company policies were crafted word by word together. Mike, if you want to keep someone, do it discreetly, don't come to disgust me in public." Silence fell around us. He hesitated for a moment, suppressing his anger. "Lisa, I'm the actual controller of the company. As the boss, I have the authority to appoint, and you have no right to meddle." With a hint of a crying voice, Selena fearlessly said, "Lisa, obviously, Mike and I are true love. Since you two aren't married, a man unmarried, a woman not wed, why do you want to impose moral restraints and speak so harshly?" She added, muttering, "Dating for 6 years but still not married, then it's never going to happen." We all heard that. Mike, still harboring some anger, looked at me indifferently but didn't argue. Everyone exchanged glances. I looked at that familiar yet unfamiliar face and suddenly felt that everything was meaningless. A tough client finally agreed today. I had planned to celebrate with him at a revolving restaurant, excitedly rushing to the office. But while I was out hustling and bustling, entertaining and making deals, he was pampering a delicate flower with our joint efforts. Feeling disheartened, I didn't want to say another word to him. I grabbed my bag, pushed past him, and left. As the elevator doors closed, I saw Mike standing still in silence, his expression unreadable. Selena clung to him, smugly making a face at me. Being decisive, when I got home, I called the servant to pack my bags. While packing, I saw an old photo. Mike had his arm around me, holding a trophy high. We both looked vigorous and elated. 6 years ago, I boldly stayed with him to build his business. I had a falling out with my family, and my dad froze my cards and assets in anger. While Mike worked multiple part-time jobs, pulled all-nighters to finish reports, and hustled to give presentations, he never let me suffer and always pampered me like a daughter. But at his lowest point, when I passed by a cake shop window and took a second glance, he bought a cake with his part-time earnings despite claiming not to like sweet treats. One night, I woke up to find him not in bed. I found him in the kitchen nibbling on bread with cold water. I cried and asked him why, and he rubbed my head, laughing, saying he couldn't let me regret following him when he won an award and gave interviews. He always emotionally thanked me, saying he would always prioritize me. But Mike, they say there's a 7-year itch. We didn't even make it past 6 years. I took a deep breath and threw old photos into the trash. In the middle of the night, Mike came back. Seeing me still sitting on the couch, he pressed his temples anxiously. What do you want, after all? I calmly said, let's break up. I will transfer the company's shares, and you can exercise your right of first refusal. Mike stared blankly, looking around and realizing the emptiness in the room. Lisa, don't be silly, he embraced me and tried to kiss me. But I smelled a faint scent of gardenias from him, the same as Selena's. I recoiled and pushed him away, disgusting, don't touch me. He turned cold, why? Haven't I been good to you all these years? The stock options I gave you have multiplied in value. I coldly responded, it's only fair for you to give me those. If it weren't for my family's sponsorship in the early stages, the company wouldn't have survived until fundraising. He probably remembered his humble beginnings and showed a look of disgust. That's all in the past, why do you keep holding on to it? Mike said, his tone turning disdainful. Lisa, I hate your pushy and calculating ways. He used to say he was lucky to have me manage things. Now he accuses me of being too calculating. Exhausted, I said, Mike, let's move on from each other. With a cold smile, he taunted, fine, but you caused trouble between me and my family and have been with me for so many years. Aside from me, who else would want you? He was confident that once I left, I would have nowhere to go. That's why he dared not to marry me for 6 years, seeking new love. This was the man I had loved for 6 years. His true nature was nauseating. As I pushed the door open, his indifferent voice came from behind. Lisa, be careful, you might regret causing a scene. I simply said, thank you for not marrying me. They say feeling sorry for a man is the beginning of misfortune. A month later, when I ran into him and Selena at the mall, I realized this series of misfortunes were far from over. Selena, who had taken over, was even more arrogant. As expected, she wanted to snatch the limited edition bracelet I had bought. Mike frowned. How much did you pay? I'll give you 3 times. I glanced at him indifferently and said, anything I like, she wants to take. I can let go of trash, but not anything else. Mike's jaw clenched, and he coldly ordered, pack up this entire row for me. The shop assistant gave me a pitying and apologetic look, collected the jewelry in front of me. Selena sneered, who do you think you are to show off? You've already left the company. You were kicked out by your family, and now Mike doesn't want you. You're alone and helpless. Why pretend to be rich? Save money for rent. Being kicked out by my family must have been something Mike told her. I almost laughed at his harsh words. Did he really think I caused trouble between him and his family? At that moment, another friend messaged me, inquiring about what had happened between me and Mike. I opened social media and saw Mike's post with Selena. Having been classmates and worked together with Mike, our social circles heavily overlapped. But his post had been up for half a day and hardly any mutual friends had interacted with it. I scoffed. As he indulged in love with a younger woman, he had forgotten about the company's business partners, all thanks to the connections I had made. I never expected that Mike would be so infatuated to the point of bringing Selena to public events. Selena, in her debut appearance, dressed like a fluttering butterfly, flitting around in the crowd. In this circle, where there were no secrets, everyone had heard about Mike's actions and looked down upon him as we exchanged cups and words, curious or mocking glances were cast my way. The pampered rich girl leaving everything behind to be with a poor boy. I couldn't bear to sit there and listen to the dirty words. I took a deep breath, put on a smile, raised my glass, and prepared to socialize. "Lisa, have you caused enough trouble?" I raised my head to see Mike standing in front of me, looking displeased. "We lost several deals at the company again. When will you stop stirring things up?" The surroundings fell silent, with a mix of obvious and subtle glances aimed at me. I looked at him indifferently and said, "I've sold off all my shares." "Mr. Mike, are you still expecting me to work hard for you?" He looked incredulous. "After all, the company was co-founded by you. How could you be so irresponsible?" Selena, holding desserts, leaned in next to him, sneering, "Given the tough environment now, jobs are hard to come by. Mike kindly agreed to take you in, so don't act all high and mighty." She smiled sweetly. "You're getting old, you should change that bad temper. No one would want you." I got fed up with their pestering, so I just said, "I'm engaged, stay out of it." Selena chuckled. "Engaged? You really know how to joke." But Mike didn't laugh. Gripping his glass tightly, his face darkened. "With who?" As the silence lingered, Selena's smile turned more mocking. Whisperings filled the room. I felt like I had given a feeble excuse. Almost involuntarily, I looked at the man seated nearby and blurted out, "Johnny." The whole room fell silent in that instant. Everyone turned their gaze to the man at the table, elegant and powerful. A titan in the business world, able to command half the sky with just a wave of his hand. Johnny's hand holding the cigarette paused. Even his silent demeanor exuded an air of inapproachability. My heart trembled, but the words had already left my mouth, impossible to take back. I could only look at him imploringly. Those 3 seconds felt like 3 years. He looked at me with deep eyes. "Since it's out in the open, come sit next to me." Having gone through everything together, he still helped me. I breathed a sigh of relief and walked towards the main table. All eyes were on us, their astonishment undisguised. Under the intense scrutiny, Johnny remained composed, gallantly pulling out my chair and asking for utensils on my behalf. I whispered a thank you. Johnny nodded slightly, then turned to continue his conversation with those around him. I knew he was trying to ease my discomfort. The inquisitive gazes at the table made the atmosphere slightly awkward. Even though this was the circle I was born into, my current life seemed worlds apart. Seated beside me was a childhood friend from a wealthy family, now married and preoccupied with fashion shows at high-end venues. She raised her glass and clinked it with mine, a look of undisguised pity in her eyes. "Do you regret it? If you had just behaved as your family's precious daughter, the people mocking you today would have only held you in esteem." I looked up and met Mike's gaze. He was still standing there, staring at me intensely, the hand holding his glass turning white with the pressure. No matter how much Selena tried to pull him away, he remained unresponsive. I averted my gaze, smiling faintly as I retorted, "Why should I regret it? He is not my entire life, why should I let him define my entire existence?" She was taken aback. As I set down my glass, I saw a hint of a smile play across Johnny's lips. After 3 rounds of drinks, I made an early exit. But Mike was persistent and followed me closely. His face darkened as he looked at me. "Lisa, it was you who asked Johnny for help, right? How could he possibly be engaged to you?" At that moment, a stretch Maybach suddenly stopped in front of us. The door opened, and a middle-aged man stepped out. He separated Mike from me and respectfully said, "Lisa, Johnny asks for your presence in the car." I gave Mike a brief glance and got into the car. The interior exuded a woody fragrance. Johnny took off his suit jacket, assuming a relaxed yet elegant posture. He instructed the butler to lower the partition, turning the back seat into a private space. "Thank you." I paused, then added, "I'm sorry. I took advantage of your influence without your permission. Aren't you now relieved that we weren't engaged?" He was the scion of a business empire, accustomed to high status and always obliging. 6 years ago, I had been so ungrateful, rejecting the olive branch he extended. Johnny gazed at me with no hint of impatience in his eyes. He tapped the interior of the peach wood gently with his slender fingers and smiled subtly. "You did well at the banquet, right? Harmony in life is most important. Besides, I don't see anything wrong with you now." I didn't know much about Johnny. We graduated from the same school, with him being 2 years ahead of me, and only had a few brief encounters at events and school. Judging from the fact that he was still willing to engage in business with our company after I declined the marriage proposal, it seemed he harbored no ill feelings towards me. Now it seemed I had made the right bet. I whispered, "Johnny, are you interested in making a deal with me?" Stepping out of the elevator, the One Group's golden-lettered sign loomed before me. The One was an industry under Johnny's family. In my first week at work, I inadvertently overheard colleagues gossiping about me. Being appointed as a director at my young age, and being quite attractive, they suspected something fishy. Little did they know that Mr. Johnny, who looked so calm and collected, could not escape the call of temptation. Cindy, a round-faced girl, was particularly avid. "I often see them in meetings late at night, it's probably." I called Cindy and asked her to take meeting notes. Pushing open the door to the meeting room, I met Mike's intense stare. Today was the day for client negotiations. As the person on Johnny's side who knew Mike's company best, I naturally took the lead. Selena sat next to him, rolled her eyes when she saw me. In the past, I was in charge of business at Mike's company, and it was obvious that Selena had her eyes on my position. However, she could only recite everything by rote in front of the screen. Once interrupted, she would forget her lines, and when it came to professional issues, she was clueless. Mike had to step in numerous times, looking embarrassed, and the presentation was a mess. As the client's impatience grew and they kept checking their phones, I knew this deal was going downhill. I stood up, turned off the screen directly. Selena was stunned. "Lisa, what are you doing?" I ignored her and said to everyone, "I didn't explain clearly just now. Let me add more details." Having worked at the previous company for 6 years, I was naturally familiar with the business. Taking the questions the client had asked earlier as a starting point, I quickly unraveled the situation and took control again. The clients nodded frequently and had a positive interaction with me, while Cindy looked at me with more admiration. Mike gazed at me intently, ignoring Selena's attempts to catch his attention. She sat motionless, defeated. The meeting ended with a successful signing. When I left the meeting room, Mike was still reprimanding Selena coldly. "It was such an important event. Why did you insist on taking over?" He warned her not to participate in such events in the future. Now Mike's company was on the decline, and he couldn't afford to take risks anymore. She had tears in her eyes and argued aggrievedly. Of course I knew how important today was. "You saw it, I prepared for this meeting for a whole month." As I walked out, Mike pushed her aside and came after me. Selena was startled, staring at me with hatred. With a glint in his eyes, he said, "Lisa, don't get me wrong. I'm just working for the One." I cut him off and said, "If you want to praise her, you should see if she can handle it. If there's a next time, I'll rethink whether it's necessary to renew the contract with us." Angered by my words, Mike said in a somewhat embarrassing manner, "Are you just here in Johnny's company to provoke me?" Seeing me about to leave, he grabbed my wrist tightly and said in a low voice, "Resign, let's talk when we go back." Ignoring the busy corridor around us, I coldly told him to let go. Suddenly, Selena shouted loudly, "Lisa, you're engaged. Why are you bothering my boyfriend?" She cried, accusing me, "You have a great fiancé like Johnny, why are you trying to steal mine?" Her words were shocking. Everyone stopped and watched us tug at each other. It felt like going back in time to 8 years ago. Back then, before my stepmother took over, she came to my school and stopped me in public. She slapped me. "Your mom is shameless, getting old and ugly, causing my miscarriage. You, the lowly offspring of a lowly creature, will all pay." I was slapped and turned my head, feeling a ringing in my ears. Everyone watched silently, mocking the wealthy family's messy private affairs. I was overwhelmed with shame. I resisted desperately, but my stepmother grabbed my hair like crazy. My school bag was taken away, books and items falling all over the ground. Until someone stood in front of me, firmly holding her back and warning her that he would call the police if she misbehaved again. Shocked by the resistance, my stepmother shrank back and was helped away by the servants. He dispersed the onlookers and picked up all the scattered items from the ground, putting them back into my bag. He handed it to me, saying, "It's not your fault." I looked up dazedly. The twilight glow colored Mike's handsome and warm face. He was the one who saved me from the nightmare, and I always had a bit of a filter on him. But now, the person who saved me was repeating the nightmare with me. Mike watched Selena causing a scene with a cold gaze. From now on, he truly cut ties with his past, 8 years ago. Losing all patience, I immediately had Cindy call the security hotline. I said expressionlessly to Mike, "If you don't leave now, things will get ugly. Don't regret it." Mike sneered, took Selena and left. Cindy, who had seen it all, muttered, "A pair of lunatics." News of my special relationship quickly spread, and everyone's expression towards me became subtle. Until I completed the department's quarterly KPI in half a month and secured a difficult large deal simultaneously, there were rumors that Johnny and I graduated from the same Ivy League school, and despite being born into a wealthy family, I started from scratch, and the company had received Series C funding. Since then, they all looked at me in a different light. Cindy became my fan, saying sharply, "It's solved. Mr. Johnny is still that otherworldly Mr. Johnny. Who knew you were really having late-night meetings with Lisa?" I laughed at her words. As my phone buzzed, the assistant sent a message saying Mike's company's stock price had dropped to a trigger point and asked if I wanted to buy more shares. I spun my ring around and glanced at the financial report on my hand, saying calmly, "Not urgent, it hasn't hit rock bottom yet." The next day, Johnny announced that the outstanding employees of the year would go on a week-long trip to the Maldives. However, my colleagues looked puzzled, discussing how after so many years, they only just found out the company benefits included a company-sponsored trip. Cindy whispered to me, "Isn't it because of Lisa? Mr. Johnny noticed you've been in a bad mood recently, so he took you on this trip in the name of benefits." When she heard that I was going scuba diving with Johnny, she held a yellow rubber duck floa tie and asked, "Lisa, do you have an open water 50 certification?" She widened her eyes. "You still have time for diving?" I couldn't help but laugh. I love being underwater, with just the sound of my breath and bubbles around me when the water is above my head. We were lucky to encounter a hammerhead shark storm on our first dive. Under the deep blue sea, watching these strange creatures swirl above us, it felt almost like a moment of reconciliation with my own life. Back on the yacht, after finishing work with Johnny, I got up to head back to my room. Just then, a wave hit the boat and I stumbled, falling into him. Johnny was sitting on the couch, relaxed, with water still dripping from his hair, exuding a certain tension. We locked eyes silently, his gaze darkening, the muscles in his beautifully shaped throat moving up and down. Actually, I really liked Johnny's type of face. His sharp phoenix eyes, chiseled profile, and extraordinary handsomeness. If he wasn't my intended fiancé, I would be happy to give it a try. Emotions fluctuated, but everything happened in an instant. As I tried to stand up, the apology was already on the tip of my tongue, but before I could say it, Johnny suddenly raised his hand, sliding his fingers through my hair and firmly holding the back of my head. I was pressed back onto his lap. His breath suddenly quickened, he lowered his head and gently captured my lips. The room was spacious, yet the air felt thin and the temperature rose slowly. I lost track of time, and faintly heard a knock on the door. It was Cindy calling Johnny to come have cake. While Johnny's lips and tongue lingered near my ear, a tingling sensation crept up to the top of my head. His long and sharply defined fingers wandered around. I lowered my head. The hem of my skirt had ridden up to my waist, and his shirt was all wrinkled. Feeling a sense of shame, I held my breath, lightly biting my lip to control the tide of emotions. After a while, with no response to the knocking, Cindy said, "Johnny and Lisa are not in the room, maybe they're on the deck." The sound faded as they walked away. Johnny returned to toy with my lips, gently reminding me with a soft laugh, "Lisa, breathe." Time flew by during the trip, and when Johnny took me back, I surprisingly felt a bit reluctant. Just as I was about to get off the car, he suddenly grabbed my wrist. "I'll take you somewhere." He led me to the front of a top luxury jewelry store, where the store manager and staff were waiting at the door, bowing to us. Johnny grinned casually. "You lost a ring in the Indian Ocean. Today we're here to replace it." I was stunned. It wasn't until that day when I returned to my room that I realized a ring I had worn for over 10 years was missing. The plain band ring was obviously not worth much, but I never expected him to care so much. It was a ring my dad gave me as a child. The reason I wore it daily was quite silly, to motivate myself that if I didn't work hard, would end up getting married and going back. At that moment, I heard a familiar voice, "Lisa?" I turned around, and Mike and Selena stood to the side, carrying shopping bags, clearly just being escorted out of the store. Johnny's hand was still around my waist, and upon seeing the others, he tightened his grip. Mike seemed a bit taken aback. I had blocked him, yet he had been trying to contact me using different numbers during this time, all of which I had added to my block list. When he regained his composure, he still wanted to come to me. However, the staff had drawn a red line and barred him from entering. Selena stood behind him, looking humiliated. Without looking back, I entered the store with Johnny. When we returned to the residence, I played with the new ring, while sending a message to my assistant, "You can begin now." Soon after, Mike couldn't hold back and came to see me in person. Through gritted teeth, he asked, "Lisa, did you join the one just to maliciously acquire my company? Are you willing to degrade your own efforts just to retaliate against me? Or do you want to win Johnny's favor by taking my company?" He was suspicious. I smiled and let him frantically speculate. "Do you have time to argue with me? Your time is running out." He coldly laughed. "Do you really think you have what it takes?" With that, he slammed the door and left. Just as I arrived at the company, my secretary informed me, "Lisa, there's a visitor waiting for you in the office." Upon opening the door, I saw an unexpected guest. My father stood by the window, his expression still stern. He looked at me coldly. "It's been 6 years, haven't you learned your lesson? Running after a poor boy, becoming the subject of ridicule." I remained silent for a moment. "Dad, my company's market value has doubled in the past 6 years, likely ranking at the top. Don't you see any of this? What do we lack in our family just because of what you earn?" He snorted. "For the sake of money, you've tarnished your own reputation." He always easily denied my achievements, bringing me back to where I started. Once again, becoming the poor little girl from childhood who was ignored and abused by everyone. "I see that Johnny doesn't reject you. Come with me to apologize to the merchants, and I can consider asking about the marriage arrangement from both families." I said softly, "Is that what you want? To see me walk the same path as you and Mom?" He was stunned, then grabbed the heavy folder on the table and threw it at me, angrily saying, "How dare you interfere in my affairs?" I couldn't dodge in time and raised my hand to block. My arm stung as a long cut appeared. He was still furious. "Fine, I will continue to freeze your cards, block your assets. No company will dare to hire you. Outside of here, no one will give you a job." My eyes welled up, the room gradually became blurry. I chuckled. Hasn't it been like this for the past 6 years? From my assets being frozen upon graduation, to my company facing roadblocks in financing, and now resigning, even if I had a pleasant job interview, the employers would avoid my gaze and politely send rejection emails. If it wasn't for Johnny showing up out of nowhere, perhaps he would have seen me in a more desperate state. My father shook with anger and left, slamming the door. I stood still. I was the product of a marriage, with my parents always at odds with each other since I can remember. The whole farce finally came to an end before my graduation, with my mom moving overseas and my stepmother, the mistress, taking her place in the household. When I was humiliated by my stepmother, my dad always turned a blind eye. But he showered his son, only a year younger than me, with all the affection. I realized he didn't dislike children, just me. He had his son join the family company right after he graduated. But when I graduated, my dad forced me to marry Johnny. Our family wasn't as prominent as theirs, and he was ecstatic to climb the social ladder through this marriage. It dawned on me that he had insisted on providing me with a top-notch education, graduating from a prestigious school, just to sell me off. I didn't want to be a commodity, repeating my mom's mistakes, juggling with various mistresses every day. In an act of rebellion, I chose to be with a driven poor young man. My father looked down upon as my phone buzzed. I read the message and silently smiled. The show was about to begin. At a grand banquet, all the important figures had gathered. Mike was surrounded by people, looking ecstatic. Everyone congratulated the company on its recent success in securing a big deal. Mike was truly a young talent, on the verge of going public. He modestly smiled. "Thank you, everyone. The company was facing a hostile takeover not long ago, but thankfully, with your help, we overcame it. And this latest big deal was also possible thanks to this major shareholder here." He had Selena by his side, charming everyone, stealing the spotlight. Even my dad, who always looked down on Mike, raised his glass to him and offered kind words. Our family depended on Mike for its future. My dad called me over. "My daughter has disappointed me, causing a lot of trouble in the past. Lisa, quickly go and toast to Mike." Selena, linking arms with my stepmother, acted affectionate. "Uncle, don't be upset. Even though Lisa has been with Mike for 6 years, and was even kicked out, Johnny still wants her." My stepmother looked around cautiously and said sarcastically, "By the way, why haven't we seen Johnny? Didn't they get engaged?" Selena pretended to be surprised. "You didn't know about their engagement, Auntie?" Like mother, like daughter, Lisa and her mom are both unlucky. There was a loud laughter all around. I glanced lightly at them. My dad frowned at me. "Lisa, you've been too stubborn these years." Quickly apologized to Mike. Mike was sitting on the sofa, casually swaying his glass of red wine, looking at me calmly. "Lisa, beg me, and I might consider forgiving the past." Seeing me remain silent, my dad reached out and pushed me. I stumbled, about to be embarrassed in public, but was steadied by someone's firm grasp. I looked up and met Johnny's cold eyes, and he held me by my waist. "I'm here." Mike's face darkened. He couldn't afford to offend anyone. My stepmother paused, quickly putting on a smile. "Oh, Johnny is here. You two are back together then, aren't you? If you ask me, you should have married each other long ago." Johnny stared at her with a smirk. "I was the one pursuing Lisa, and she hasn't said yes to me yet. She said we were engaged to save face for me." She chuckled nervously. Is that so?" Selena gritted her teeth and glared at me. At that moment, a middle-aged man entered, and Mike hurried over. "You're here." He introduced him to the others as the major shareholder of the company. The man, however, reacted coolly, walking straight to my side. "Boss, all the paperwork is done." The atmosphere suddenly froze. Mike's smile stiffened on his face. He turned around, looked at me with quivering voice. "Lisa, what does this mean?" I wiped my hands calmly, poured myself another glass of wine. I was the hidden shareholder, and he was just holding my shares on my behalf from start to finish. Your business partner, the white angel you've been dreaming of, was me. I never intended to hand over my hard work to someone else. I just wanted. I tilted my head slightly, thought for a moment, and chose an appropriate adjective to address my father and son. "Now, I am the major shareholder of this company." I clinked glasses with him, smiling. "Mike, thank you for all your hard work for the company. Cheers." Mike widened his eyes, looking pale. He even stumbled backward, nearly tripping. Behind him, Selena knocked over a bottle of red wine. Everyone in my family looked extremely unhappy. I glanced around, laughed heartily, downed my glass of wine. Growing up in such a materialistic and twisted environment, how could I ever believe in love firmly? From the day I discovered that Mike was cheating, I started planning. Pretending to be weak, disillusioned, I slyly sold my shares and gradually withdrew from the company. Entering the one later was just to lower their guard. And the acquisition offer from the one was a smoke bomb. All to make Mike panic and act recklessly, forcing him to cut off all ties, and selling his own company at a low price. From beginning to end, I was just waiting for the right moment to make my move. After the dinner party, I went to Johnny's suite and handed him a stock transfer agreement. "Johnny, it's been a pleasure doing business with you. When we first made our deal, it was a mutually beneficial arrangement. He allowed me into his company and provided me with resources. I promised Johnny a share of the stock once I closed this deal. With his help, my plan went much smoother, and I managed to lower the acquisition offer significantly. Working at the one during this time, the department structure was clear, processes were standardized, and I benefited greatly from his management style." Johnny sat on the couch by the window, his long legs crossed, a cigarette dangling from his lips. As I turned to leave, he grabbed my wrist. "Lisa, I haven't agreed to end it here," he said. I looked into his deep eyes as I turned back, leaned in, took the cigarette from his lips, and inhaled deeply. "So, Johnny, what do you have in mind?" I asked. His lips brushed against my ear. "The last time, we didn't finish what we started. You're not one to leave things half done." I smiled. That might not be a bad thing for me. I admit, I did desire his body. Sitting on top of him, looking out at the city lights, with massive luxury brand logos hanging outside the window, enveloped in his scent, our body temperatures rising. Johnny's voice was as rich as a cello to begin with. In his melodic breathing, I felt like I was on cloud nine. The next day at work, Mike was waiting for me at the company's entrance, but I ignored him. He was still waiting outside when it was pitch dark. In the freezing temperature with snowflakes falling, his cheeks were bright red. Johnny asked me, "Do you still want to see him?" I had no doubt that if I declined, he would have someone escort Mike out on the spot. Final words were necessary. He nodded. "I'll be smoking nearby. Just call me if you need me." As I approached, Mike was almost in tears of joy. "Lisa, you finally agreed to see me. I know I've made a huge mistake. I've neglected you all these years, so I've prepared gifts for you to make up for the past 6 years." He took out a jewelry box, recounting our past, explaining the origins of each gift. Watching him speak, I couldn't deny his extraordinary qualities. Mike, a poor boy, had managed to rise to the same level as us, which was no small feat. Besides rebelling against fatherly authority, I genuinely admired his talent. I happily found a man who was nothing like my father, but eventually, I watched him slowly transform into my father's image. He hid it well, the most refined selfishness. Having run out of patience, I interrupted him. "Is it so cold that you're here just to revisit past memories?" I asked. He paused, a bitter smile on his face, his voice hoarse. "We can never go back, can we?" He trembled as he pulled out a photo from his pocket, the same one I had thrown in the trash. I had torn it up, but he had picked up the pieces, glued them back together. I looked at him coldly. Why bring back something that was thrown away? It's so dirty. His eyelashes trembled. Mike closed his eyes, his voice cracking as he confessed, "Do you know? No matter how far I went, in front of you, I was always inferior. I could never reach your circle, even if I stood on tiptoes or jumped. I scrimped and saved to buy you luxury bags, only for you to carry them shamelessly. It was only in the presence of other women that I could find dignity and superiority." He opened his eyes, pleading with me. "But, Lisa, I never once thought of marrying anyone else. I only ever loved you." I took the photo from his hand and tore it up again. "Can your inferiority serve as an excuse for your infidelity and disrespect towards me?" Thinking I was isolated and alone, he paraded around with another woman. Realizing I had the upper hand, he came back to beg for mercy. I scattered the pieces on his face, speaking condescendingly. Mike, you're truly despicable. He clenched his fists, his eyes red with anger. When my father visited again, I was busy restructuring the company. The man in front of me, half his hair turned white, now showed signs of powerlessness. Our family business had not been doing well over these years, and now I had a firm grip on his lifeline. He sighed, no longer on his high horse. Lisa, I can make concessions and not arrange your marriage. Or if you want to join the company, I can make that happen. You're just like me in your stubbornness. Daughters really are the closest, I said, sitting in my position, looking at him with a smile that wasn't really a smile. Dad, but what I want is not that declining company on the decline. We're all businessmen, so let's not beat around the bush. It's well known that our family's products have an inflated brand value but low quality. I reached out and tapped on his quote list, scoffing, Dad, if this is your sincerity, then don't contact me in the future, contact my agent first. In his irritated yet restrained expression, I had Cindy see the client out. After he left, Cindy respectfully said to me, Lisa, have you heard? Mike is suing Selena. I smirked. A week ago, I fired Mike and Selena. Mike signed a 2-year non-compete agreement, and the company paid him compensation. If he joins a competitor or starts a business in the same field within 2 years, he has to pay double the compensation to the company. This industry changes rapidly, and 2 years later, he might have missed the boat. When Mike signed, his hands were trembling, almost on the verge of tears. Selena made a lot of mistakes during her tenure, and the company legally demanded a hefty compensation from her. She begged Mike for help, but he was too preoccupied to care, just wanting to get out. Selena even threatened with scandal, and they almost came to blows on the spot. Now, the two of them are at each other's throats, and Selena exposed him for two-timing and office politics, tarnishing his reputation. Finally, Cindy concluded, poor men sure play clever tricks. A few days later, I attended Johnny's dinner party. While helping his mother arrange flowers, she chatted with me, saying, Mike didn't smoke before. He started after you rejected his proposal. It caught me off guard. She winked at me, if you want to know his secret, go to the backyard. I asked Johnny to show me around. In the backyard, a pony was prancing around. Seeing its markings, I recognized it as the little foal I picked out when I visited their home in my childhood. My heart felt a pang. I looked up at Johnny in a daze. I had thought that our night of passion was just an unspoken indulgence for both of us. But to him, it seemed like a long-planned move. Yet, his feelings for me were almost miraculous. Johnny seemed to sense my unease and gently held my face. Don't be afraid, he murmured against my lips, what you fear will never happen. Johnny's epilogue, the day Johnny decided to end everything was the day he met Lisa. He was 10 years old, his mother being sent to a mental institution, becoming a pawn in the power struggles of the elite. Even the servants shunned him, and he had a fever for days with no one caring. He lay in the backyard storeroom, resolved to quietly embrace death. But then he saw Lisa being scolded by her stepmother and alienated by her brother. She cradled the leftover, weak foal, her eyes shining brightly. Suddenly, he no longer wanted to die. He struggled to the table and made a call. Later, he fought tooth and nail to climb to a high position. The path was strewn with thorns, and when he felt like giving up, the memory of her eyes that day came rushing back, urging him on. They met again at a university debate, where he watched her flawlessly dismantle her opponents with her arguments, leaving them speechless. He often saw her studying in the library, working hard despite her wealthy background, just like him. He engineered chance encounters on her usual routes, but never dared to approach her further. With threats looming behind him, he couldn't bring himself to involve her. On the day Lisa was openly harassed by her stepmother, he was supposed to be working on an important report. When he hurriedly got up, not even pausing to clean up the spilled water on his computer. But when he arrived, another man was already shielding her. Fate played another cruel joke. He was too late. He had just ascended to power, still unstable, not daring to directly contact her. He only mentioned Lisa's name when his parents asked about a marriage alliance. By then, she was already with Mike, standing together. She decisively refused and fell out with her family. That night, Johnny lit his first cigarette. This was for the best, he thought. After all, without a shared background of suffering, their energy should be spent on making a living. Mike should understand better how to love her. In the 6 years that followed, he tried. But every date, he thought of the various women around his father. Except Lisa. He remembered the scent of her perfume. He had forced himself to do many things against his will, but in this, he couldn't push. If he didn't like it, he couldn't pretend. He watched from a distance their business dealings with Mike, which he subtly handled, and then also caused trouble for Lisa's father's company. Until that dinner party. Mike and her had a public fallout, and everyone was laughing at her. He wanted to help, but feared public opinion, afraid of dragging her into deeper trouble. Finally, Lisa looked at him. Her eyes were stubborn and panicked. In those 3 seconds, Johnny thought about a lot. The past decade flashed before his eyes like a carousel. And yet, it felt like he thought of nothing. He heard himself say, "Since it's out in the open, come sit next to me now."